Elias Carter rose before dawn, as he did every morning, long before the roosters crowed or the first glow touched the horizon. His life ran in the steady rhythm of chores, quiet meals, and solitary evenings. At 35, he had grown accustomed to silence so profound that sometimes he wondered if it had become part of him, woven into his breath, stitched into his bones. Years ago, he had tried courting, but his soft-spoken manner and awkwardness with words made women overlook him. A shy rancher, they called him, kind but too quiet. Over time, he stopped trying. He tended the land, cared for his horses, fixed fences, and wrote letters to his sister short ones, because even on paper, he struggled to express himself. One afternoon, the local pastor rode up. Elias rarely received visitors, and the sight of the pastor made him uneasy. He listened quietly as the man explained about a woman traveling through town, a widow in need of temporary lodging. Elias hesitated. He wasn't used to sharing his space, his quiet. But looking at the pastor's weary expression and remembering his mother's teachings about kindness, he nodded once. "She can stay," he said in a voice barely above a whisper. When Clara arrived late evening, a chill had settled over the valley. She stepped down from the wagon with a small satchel in hand. She looked delicate, but carried herself with quiet dignity. No ring, no smile. When their eyes met for the first time, neither spoke. Elias showed her to the spare room, then silently set a bowl of stew on the table. She thanked him softly, but barely touched the food. He didn't press her. That night, as he sat by the window, the house seemed different, less empty, but also unsettled. The faint sound of her muffled crying drifted through the hallway. He closed his eyes, his heart tightening, because he knew the sound of swallowed grief. Something inside him, something long dormant, shifted. He didn't know her story. She didn't know his. But as he extinguished the lamp, one quiet thought settled inside him like an ember. For the first time in years, he didn't feel quite so alone. Clara Barrett had once believed that if she followed all the rules, if she was courteous, obedient, respectable, life would protect her. But she learned early that quiet women were often unheard and gentle hearts were the easiest to dismiss. Married at 19 to a man chosen by her parents, she entered a home where expectations weighed more than kindness. Her husband, though not unkind, remained distant. His family judged her softness and her slow speech as weakness. When her first pregnancy ended in miscarriage, whispers began perhaps she wasn't strong enough. Perhaps she wasn't fit for motherhood. The second loss shattered her completely. Her husband's passing from illness left her not with sympathy, but with condemnation. His family declared she had failed in the only duty that mattered, giving him an heir. They did not weep over the man she lost. They mourned only the future they expected of her. They gave her a small sum and urged her to return home, but even her parents spoke of her in tones of quiet disappointment. With nowhere left to belong, Clara purchased a modest ticket westward, carrying only a small satchel and the hope for a place where no one knew her history, where she could simply exist without being judged. For weeks she traveled through small towns, taking temporary work where she could mending clothes, bookkeeping, teaching children letters. She spoke little, keeping her pain tucked behind composed smiles. Each night, she prayed not for happiness, but for relief from the heaviness inside her. When she reached Willow Creek, she expected nothing more than a meal, perhaps a roof for a night. But the pastor, a man with kind eyes, sensed her exhaustion and offered more than she dared to request. "You can stay a few days," he said. "A local rancher has room." She almost refused. The idea of accepting charity once more unsettled her. But one look at the horizon, the endless stretch of land and quiet sky, made her nod wordlessly. When she stepped onto Elias Carter's ranch and saw the solitary figure standing by the fence, his posture calm yet cautious, something deep within her whispered that this place might finally offer space to breathe. Not hope yet, just quiet. and quiet was enough. The first days passed in a quiet rhythm neither of them dared to disturb. Elias rose before dawn, slipping from the house without a word, the screen door closing gently behind him. Clara watched from the kitchen window as he walked across the field, the early mist clinging to him like a second coat. She felt strangely at peace watching him, not because he spoke to her, but because he didn't force conversation. Silence between them felt respectful, not cold. Clara busied herself inside. She mended worn shirts, scrubbed the kitchen and pantry, silently refilled the wood box. One afternoon she found his coat hanging by the door threadbare at the elbows. She patched it carefully, folding it back so that he discovered it only the next morning. He held it for a long moment, then glanced toward the kitchen where she stood preparing coffee. Their eyes met. He didn't speak. Instead, he gently tipped his hat. It was the closest thing to gratitude he had ever expressed to anyone. In return, Elias began leaving small gestures of his own. A fresh flower placed at the windowsill. An extra log carefully set by the stove before dawn. One evening, when a chill wind howled across the ranch, he knocked softly and handed her a wool scarf he had found in storage. "It'll be cold tonight," he murmured. She wrapped it around her shoulders and whispered, "Thank you." Her voice trembled not from cold, but from the unfamiliar sensation of someone noticing without demanding. Their silence gradually became companionship. One evening, Elias returned late, dust settling around him like shadows. Clara had fallen asleep sitting at the table, her head resting on her arm. A candle flickered low beside her. He paused in the doorway. Something in the sight of her so tired, so small, yet so strong reached deep into the part of him that had long believed he was meant to be alone. Moving quietly, he retrieved a blanket and draped it gently across her shoulders. Her brow smoothed, as though peace had finally found her. Years of loneliness had dulled his heart, but that simple moment lit a small flame. Neither said it aloud. They didn't need to. Something between them had begun. Willow Creek was small, and small towns guarded their quiet with curiosity. Within a week of Clara staying at Elias's ranch, murmurs drifted through the saloon, the mercantile, and Sunday service. People didn't mean harm, not always, but curiosity, when left unchecked, could cut sharper than judgment. Some whispered she was after his land, that a woman with no family and no fortune could only be seeking security. Others said Elias was too gentle, too unworldly, to know when he was being taken advantage of. A few speculated Clara had been sent away from somewhere else, perhaps with a scandal, perhaps a secret. No one asked her directly. They asked around her. Clara overheard two women at the general store as she quietly examined bolts of fabric. "Poor man doesn't even talk," one said. "Maybe that's why she chose him," the other responded. Clara folded the cloth back neatly, purchased nothing, and walked out. That night, she stood on the porch with her satchel packed. The sun had dipped low, casting the land in shades of copper and dust. She wasn't crying. She had shed too many tears in her life to waste them on gossip. But her chest felt tight, the old familiar ache returning. She would not bring shame to a man who had shown her nothing but quiet dignity. The screen door creaked open. Elias stepped out, hands still stained from the day's labor. He saw the satchel and stopped. "You're leaving," he said softly. "Not a question." "I don't want to trouble you," she replied, her voice barely above the wind. "I've caused talk." He didn't look at the horizon. He looked at her. Then, with a calmness that felt like the earth itself grounding her, he said, "Let them talk." She blinked. He stepped closer, not imposing, not demanding, just present. "You haven't troubled me." Her throat tightened. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not." The words were simple, but spoken with such steady conviction that they rooted deep within her like rain after drought. The wind settled. The satchel remained by her feet, untouched. She stayed. Not because he asked her to, but because, for the first time in a very long time, someone believed she wasn't a problem to solve. She was simply welcome. Weeks passed, and the quiet understanding between Elias and Clara deepened, settling into something warm and unspoken. She found small purposes in his world, managing his accounts, cooking evening meals, tending to the herb patch beside the house. He fixed her a small corner in the barn with a chair and reading lamp, knowing she liked to sit among the horses. Neither called it home, but both began acting as though it already was. Then, one late afternoon, a carriage rolled into the ranch. Elias was repairing a fence when he heard the wheels crunch over dry earth. Clara was hanging linens on the line. The sight of the man stepping down from the carriage made her breath seize. It was Harold Brenton, her late husband's cousin, the one who'd stood silently as she was turned out of their home. He had not come for reconciliation. His expression confirmed that. "Clara," he said with cold familiarity, ignoring Elias completely, "your presence has been requested back east. There is an arrangement to be made. Your late husband's family expects you to remarry. You owe them that." Elias straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. Clara stood motionless, face pale, eyes wide. She whispered, "I do not belong to them." Harold's eyes narrowed. "You belong until they release you." "And they have not." Without raising his voice or stepping forward, Elias spoke. "She stays here." Harold scoffed, turning toward him for the first time. "And who are you to decide?" "This is not your concern, rancher." Elias held his gaze steadily. "It is. She is under my roof." Clara's eyes filled not with fear, but with something long missing, protection. Harold stepped closer. "Then I advise you send her out before a legal matter is raised." Elias didn't flinch. "She stays unless she chooses otherwise." There was no threat in his voice, only absolute conviction. Harold looked at Clara, expecting her to fold under pressure. But with Elias beside her, her spine straightened. "I will not return," she said calmly. "Tell them my life is no longer theirs to arrange." Harold stiffened, muttered under his breath, and returned to his carriage, the wheels kicking up dust as he left. The silence that followed was long but not heavy. For the first time since she arrived, silence didn't just hold comfort for Clara. It held freedom. Night had settled heavily over the ranch, the kind of night where the sky looked endless and stars felt close enough to touch. The confrontation earlier that day had left Clara shaken, not because she feared Harold, but because standing against her past had stirred something unpredictable inside her. It was fear, yes, but also the first fragile spark of courage. She couldn't sleep, so she slipped out of the house and crossed to the barn, where she knew Elias often stayed late working. The lantern inside cast a soft amber glow, painting him in quiet solitude as he sat polishing a worn saddle. His hands were steady, but she noticed the slight tremor in his fingers, the one he always tried to hide when emotions overtook him. He looked up when she entered. Their eyes met, and without a word, he set the saddle down. "You shouldn't be out in the cold," he said gently. She stepped closer, her voice soft but resolute. "I needed to talk to you." He nodded once, waiting. He was always patient, always letting her find her words. That made it harder and easier to speak. "I'm not going back," she began. "Not to them. Not to that life." She paused, fingers twisting in the fabric of her skirt. "But I don't want to drift anymore." His brow furrowed slightly. "Clara," she interrupted, her voice fragile but determined. "I want to build something. A life. A future." Her gaze didn't waver. "I want a family." His breath caught. He tried to speak, but she continued, whispering the words that trembled like hope. "I want a child." The barn felt utterly still. Elias stared at her as if the earth had shifted beneath his feet. No one had ever asked that of him. No one had ever imagined he could offer it. His voice broke. "Clara, I don't know if I can give you that." I've spent my life quiet because I didn't believe I had much worth offering." She stepped closer, her hand lightly brushing his. "You offer kindness, safety, respect. That's more than anyone has ever given me." His eyes softened, overwhelmed. "But what if I fail you?" She smiled through tears. "Then we'll fail together. But we'll face it as ours." For the first time, she saw him breathe not cautiously, but fully. And for the first time, he let himself hope. The lantern flickered gently as silence settled after Clara's words. For years, Elias had believed that silence was his shelter, his shield from expectations he feared he couldn't meet. But in this moment, it felt like silence was the only thing holding back the flood of emotions he had never learned how to name. He stared at Clara, searching her face for any trace of uncertainty, any sign he had misunderstood. Instead, he found steady resolve. "You're not afraid?" he finally asked, his voice rough, almost fragile. Clara hesitated only a heartbeat. "I've been afraid all my life," she admitted softly. "Afraid of being unworthy, of disappointing everyone, of breaking again." Her hands trembled as she continued. "But staying afraid hasn't protected me. It's only kept me from living." Her words sank deep. Elias understood that fear his was different in shape, but not in weight. He feared being judged for his quietness, for not being the kind of man others expected. He feared failing someone who trusted him. But he had never before considered that failing together might be less lonely than succeeding alone. Letting out a slow breath, Elias looked down at their hands, now gently intertwined. "I don't know how to be what you need," he admitted. Clara stepped closer, closing the space between them. "You don't need to know now," she said. "We learn together. We build together." He had spent so many years believing that what he lacked defined him. But standing here with her, he began to wonder if what he offered, patience, steadiness, quiet strength, might finally be enough. A trembling smile touched his lips. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. Her reply was immediate. "I don't want someone I deserve, Elias. I want someone I choose." Emotion broke through the dam he had held for so long. His thumb softly brushed the back of her hand, tentative but present. "Then we try," he said, voice weighted with sincerity. "No promises except that. I won't walk away." "And neither will I," she replied. It wasn't a declaration of love, not yet. It was something deeper. A vow made not with certainty, but with courage. In that quiet barn, surrounded by saddles and hay and the scent of horses, they didn't just find hope. They chose it. Spring washed over the ranch slowly, like warmth seeping into long-frozen earth. The air softened, the trees budded with silent promise, and the fields outside the house shifted from winter as bronze to spring as first emerald hue. Clara stood on the porch one early morning, wrapped in the same wool scarf Elias had given her months before. The sky was pale gold, and birdsong floated gently on the breeze. Inside the house, footsteps sounded softly. Elias joined her, his presence quiet as ever, but something was different now. The quiet between them no longer felt like a barrier. It felt like a shared language. They stood side by side as the sun rose over the hills. Clara inhaled deeply, no longer tentatively, and for the first time since she arrived, her breath didn't catch from fear. Elias glanced at her, noting the calm in her features, no longer weighed down by the fear of failing, but uplifted by the decision to keep trying. The house behind them was modest, still smelling faintly of new wood. Elias had started building the extra room soon after their conversation in the barn, not because he believed everything would be perfect, but because he finally believed they were worth building for. Clara had planted herbs beneath the window, laughter occasionally drifting across the yard when he teased her gently about how fiercely she guarded her garden. Their future was uncertain, but uncertainty no longer felt like a threat. Elias finally spoke, his voice low. "I still don't know what tomorrow will bring." She turned to him, her hand finding his, fingers interlacing naturally. "We don't need to know," she replied softly. "We just need to wake up and face it together." He nodded, the corners of his lips lifting in the soft, rare smile she'd come to treasure. "Together," he echoed. She rested her head against his shoulder as the sun broke fully over the land, washing everything in light. The two of them, once defined by loneliness, now stood not as people waiting for life to happen, but as partners choosing life, one day at a time. Whether a child would come didn't define them anymore. What defined them was that when the dawn rose, their hands were joined. And for the first time in either of their lives, they were no longer breathing just to survive. They were breathing to live.